Alright, so this lesson is called Fitting In, and it is one of my favorite lessons because the students really have a great time with it, and I think it really does a good job of following up our DNA extraction lesson to help kids continue to think about how powerful this molecule is. And so the focus is going to be on camouflage today, and we're going to just talk about how camouflage is a great example of an adaptation that helps animals survive in their habitats. And we're going to go through several examples of some different camouflage that animals have, including an octopus, which is an amazing animal. It can actually change its color and its texture to blend into its surroundings, and the kids really enjoy seeing that. I'm getting ahead of myself here though. Before I get any farther, let me give you the standards for this lesson. The standards this week are 8.3.1. Students will investigate and describe the structure and function of living organisms. And 8.3.4, students will identify characteristics of organisms that help them survive. Okay, with that said, I do want to say on this lesson that the original idea for camouflaging the butterflies came from, I believe it is Project Wild. When I was an undergraduate in college in my science methods class, we became Project Wild certified, and this is one of the lessons that one of our class members shared with us, and I really liked it and have enjoyed using it in the last few years. And so, again, the lesson is going to start with a discussion about camouflage and how that's an adaptation and how that can all be traced back to the DNA. And in this lesson, we will again mention that DNA is passed from parent to child. So from generation to generation, that DNA is passed on. And we're really going to focus on, at the end of our little talk, I have a description of a moth called the peppered moth. And so it's a white moth with black specks on it, or there's a black version of it. So it's the same species, just two colorations. And the forest that they live in is of birch trees, and the birch trees are white. And so a bird is going to see the black moths more often. And so over time, we'll talk to the kids about how there's more white moths than there are black moths. Not just because there's fewer white moths getting eaten, and so there's more of them that live, but also because as those white moths live longer, they're going to pass on more DNA. Because they live longer, they're going to lay more eggs, they're going to have more babies. And so there's going to be more DNA in the general population that's going to code for white moths with black speckles than there is for black moths, because the black moths are getting eaten at a younger age. They're not passing on as much of their DNA. Right? So that's the whole idea behind this reproduction and heredity thing, and how animals species change over time and adapt to their environments, because those individuals that survive longer have a longer chance to pass on their DNA. It's an amazing thing, and it's what drives change in species. Okay, and so that's kind of the beginning of this understanding for students, is how DNA plays a part in the creation of new species. And so we'll be talking more about that with each lesson. But the interesting thing about the peppered moth is it's an example we can actually see how the population changed, because during the Industrial Revolution, the birch trees around factories became dark with soot. And all of a sudden, the black moth population starts to decline, because the black moths now have an advantage. Their adaptation, their coloration actually provides an advantage over the white moth coloration. And so there's a swing back to more black moths, again because there's more black moths surviving, but also because there's more black moths surviving, they're having more babies and they're passing on more DNA that's more likely to code for the black coloration. So that's the key. All right, that's the key, is that the adaptations, and that word is kind of confusing, I think, to students. It does not mean that an animal changes or becomes adapted to its environment over its lifetime. Okay, that's the way that the word is normally used in everyday language. Oh, well, I adapted to the situation. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about adaptations in biology. We're talking about things that an individual organism is born with this feature, this type of camouflage, or this type of appendage that helps it do whatever it does. It doesn't it doesn't create its camouflage over its lifetime. It doesn't develop that ability by thinking through how it wants to camouflage itself. That is a direct result, okay, its camouflage is a direct result of selection for the best camouflage over long periods of time, millions of years, by nature. It's a natural selection process. And so the best suited animals survive and pass on that information to the next generation. So when we talk about adaptations, it's sometimes confusing, I think, for students, but what we want to try to get students to think about is that this is a process that takes long periods of time. It's not something that an animal does in its lifetime, and it's not usually something that happens in just a few generations. Okay? So with that being said, the way that this lesson works is that each student is going to get 3 butterflies. And if you want this particular butterfly pattern, you can find it right below this video along with the lesson plan and the PowerPoint. And what students are going to do is they're going to get their butterflies, and they're going to have to look around the room and try to find a place where they could camouflage a butterfly. So let me stop here and let me show you. I've got a few camouflage in my room, and then we'll kind of come back and talk about how this might work in your classroom. Alright, so you can see in this general area I've got 4 or 5 different butterflies camouflaged. And I always like to show students this. I think it helps them to see an example before we get started. So we've got one camouflage butterfly here on this pink foam. It's not exactly the right pink color. We've got this green butterfly here. There's one up on the wall above this chunk of wood here. And we've got, of course, this little guy right here. Now the one that is the best camouflaged is right here next to me. It's this one. And students have a tough time seeing this one usually, and it helps them start to think about how they might camouflage theirs. It's half white, half white and half black. And again, I tell students, that's not a natural coloration for a butterfly, but in our case, for this activity, for the fun of this activity, I want to encourage them to be really creative. And so I've had kids do all kinds of things. Half red, half white on the stripes of an American flag. I've had them put letters that were on a poster on their thing and then put it over the poster. Numbers on the clock with the hands on it. It's just really interesting things, and it makes it a lot of fun. So now you've seen kind of how this might work, and the way that I run the activity is that I give the students their butterflies, and the most fun is when you can get guest predators. So let me explain first how it works. The kids will have 5 minutes. Usually the first one I maybe even give them 6 or 7 minutes because it takes them a little longer to get the feel for this. 6 or 7 minutes to color their first butterfly and cut it out and get it put up somewhere in the room. Okay? Now I always tell them that there's 2 rules, and the first rule is that it has to be in plain sight. The only way that these butterflies are going to have to hide from the predators is their camouflage. So it can't be underneath anything or behind anything. It's got to be out in the open, right? And the second thing is it can't be on any living thing. So it's got to be on, an inanimate object. It cannot be on. Otherwise, I guarantee you, half the kids are going to hide them on themselves or their friend's back. Okay? So there's no kick me butterflies allowed. And so they'll get it hidden. They'll get it colored out. They'll get it, colored, cut out, and put up. And then what I like to do is have all the kids sit down and bring in a predator. Now, if you can't find a guest predator, another teacher, a para, the principal is always a really fun one to bring in. And if you can't find one, a guest predator, you'll have to have a student who was not in the room when all the other students were putting their butterflies up come in and be the predator. And the predator has, depending on the size of the room and the number of kids, I usually give them about a minute. And they have a minute to go, run around the room looking for butterflies, and when they find them, they have to eat them. Just take them down off the walls. And after a minute, okay, the predator is going to, count up how many they got, and then they're going to leave the room again, and maybe you'll get a new predator, or maybe you'll use the same one. And the kids will have 5 minutes to do their next butterfly. If their butterfly survived, if their first butterfly survived, they're going to leave it up, and they're going to add a second one. And even if their first one got eaten, well, they'll still do a second one anyway. But the goal here for the students is to have all 3 of their butterflies survive all the predators. And it gets really, really fun if you have multiple sections of students, because if you can let the classes leave them up throughout the day, and by the end of the day you might have 250 butterflies in your room, and it's really fun then to have the principal and the assistant principal come down and have a competition to see which one of them can get the most. The kids really, really like it. Now, That said, it's a fun lesson, the kids love it, but we have to be careful here that the message doesn't get lost in the excitement of hiding and finding these butterflies. And that message is DNA is a really powerful molecule, and that's, it's what gives all animals that have camouflage that camouflage. It's found in the code of their DNA, which is passed from generation to generation. And the animals with the best camouflage are going to be able to live longer, whether it helps them to catch their prey or whether it helps them hide from their prey, or prevent themselves from becoming prey, rather. Right? The animals that can survive the longest are going to pass on that DNA to the next generation. And that next generation then is going to have a better chance of having that same ability to hide, to blend into their surroundings and live longer and pass on that DNA and live longer and pass on that DNA. And over time you get species that are the absolutely best adapted to their environment, while the species that aren't as well adapted don't make it, right? They go extinct. So that's the take-home lesson, but it is a ton of fun, and I think you and your kids are going to have a lot of fun doing this one. As a follow-up to this lesson, you could have students, research types of camouflage, and you could have students think about, why is a certain animal colored a certain way? And another interesting thing to think about is, why is a cardinal red? I mean, that is obviously horrible camouflage. Why are male animals colorful a lot of times? I mean, they're obviously risking, to a certain extent, their life just to attract females. So that's another interesting discussion you and your students can get into, is to think about, well, why are some birds colorful? And some, why wouldn't they want to be completely plain and to blend into their surroundings? So this can lead into a lot of interesting discussions about how animals, it's a balancing act between camouflage and coloration, and I think you could have a lot of good discussions and a lot of fun with it. Okay, we'll see you next time.